everyone, welcome back to the Evermore podcast, your Newcastle United podcast on the Slide Rule Pass YouTube channel. We're back with another special mark. We're going to go for some Premier League icons, and there was no other place to start, mate, was there really, but the one and only Alan Shearer, mate.
The greatest, I think, we'll go. The greatest goal scorer we'll go for in Premier League history. There was no other place to really start, especially as the Evermore podcast. Where else could we start?
Absolutely. We'd be lynched, not the lynch man, we would be lynched if we didn't start with the big man himself. Obviously, anybody who's been living under a rock for the last 35 years, Alan Shearer is, as Mark says, the greatest goal scorer the Premier League has ever known, arguably the best Newcastle United player we've ever had, and our top goal scorer. We're going to get stuck into some stats for Alan in a minute, but just to let everybody know, obviously Alan was born on the 13th of August 1970 in Newcastle. He always says he's a famed son of a sheet metal worker from Gosforth. He's a local hero. He's a hero to all Newcastle fans, old and young. And I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in this, mate. And we've got some cracking stats for Alan Shearer. So let's get right back to the start. Weirdly enough, although he is arguably our best ever player that we've produced, certainly the best goal scorer, he didn't start his youth career at Newcastle United, Mark, did he? He had to go a bit further afield.
Well, he was scouted, wasn't he? In it was Southampton that took the chance on him, and it seems strange. Another one that of one of those upper sort of levels of England players, like a little bit like Carrick as well, that was found and transported elsewhere first. And you think, is that the reason he became the player he was? Could he have been something even more special had he stayed? But the Southampton did a great job with him, got him on the roads, and the rest is history.
Absolutely. Well, he was one of the famed graduates of the Wallsend Boys Club. We played against them at Boys Club level and they kicked our ass as well, mate, a few times because they have got some phenomenal players. Obviously, Carrick was another. But let's get right to the start then. So obviously, Alan went to Southampton, really good youth academy, obviously bringing players through like the Tissier guys. I think Ruddock was there as well. I think when they were playing, was Tim Shearer or Tim Flowers might have been there as well. But there was a good conveyor belt of youth academy players coming through. And Alan was given his debut. He come on against Chelsea, I think it was, wasn't it, in 1988. But then the big headlines really were a couple of weeks later, mate, wasn't it, when he started against Arsenal, and we saw glimpses of the Alan Shearer would know and love, didn't we?
A 17-year-old, young player playing in the first division, scoring a hat-trick against Arsenal, is just he's unheard of. Just an unbelievable start to your career, and he was thrown into the limelight at that point. And I think it was a record then for as a hat trick in the top flight. I think it was. So yeah, it was just what a start to your career, and you end that season. Those were his only 3 goals of the season. But yeah, welcome to the top flight of English football, Alan Shearer.
Absolutely. Well, he was 17 years, 240 days young as what he was. And he was the youngest player since Jimmy Greaves 30 years ago to score a top flight hat trick. And what I love about that, and if you ever hear Alan talking about the story, he says the next day the manager had him in cleaning the boots in the boot room for the senior pros. So he really pulled him kind of back down to earth. And I think, as you rightly said, it's a different year and a different time with players now. Young player scores a hat trick now, the world blows up. He's on Instagram, he's all this other stuff. But back then, Shearer was grounded by a really good coach. They knew he was something special. They knew he was a fantastic player. But the coach did a great job there by Shearer, and I think that helped him stay grounded and be hungry for more. But you got some of his stats, how he finished his time at Southampton, Mark, haven't you, just to go through there before we move on to the next stage. So as you said there, the first season, them 3 goals were the first goals that he scored. Obviously, next season he didn't do too much better, did he, mate? Really, 10 games, no goals.
I think he was eased into the team, wasn't he? And as he went through those next few years, he was used to. You've got to think 17, 18, 19 for those first sort of 3 years, and then he breaks in as a 20-year-old and starts to score a few more before that last season where 13 goals in 42 games. Yes, it's not the greatest of returns, but again, for a 21-year-old at that time, that was a good return, and started to alert some of the English top flight's big boys. at that point.
Exactly, especially one in particular, and one world famous manager in Sir Alex Ferguson, who Manchester United were reportedly very keen on signing Alan back then from Southampton, as were Blackburn Rovers with Jack Walker and Kenny Dalglish. But the story goes, I mean, if you ever haven't seen Alan Shearer's soccer box for Gary Neville, it's absolutely brilliant, because just Neville's pure sadness of the fact that Manchester United could have signed him twice. And apparently, I think the first time he said that he spoke to Blackburn, they said Manchester United were interested in him. He waited for a call, and the call never came, apparently, from Manchester United. So somebody in Manchester United back then really deserves to have their arse kicked, because if you didn't ring Alan Shearer and his agent back then, you missed out on one hell of a player, which is what Blackburn Rovers signed in July 1992 for £3.6 million, which was a record deal at the time, mate. Some people raised a few eyebrows, but he hit the ground running straight away, didn't he?
Strange to think, isn't it? Was it 3.6 million? And that's a record, and that raises eyebrows. I mean, that's pocket change now. It's just madness. Yeah, and for a player of Shearer's quality, 3.6 million, as it turns out, was an absolute steal. His performances from there on in, especially for the 4 seasons at Blackburn, were just something else. That partnership that he developed with Chris Sutton was one of the most deadly in Premier League history. It's just phenomenal. I saw something yesterday where one of the media outlets, or one of the football Twitter places, it put out, what's the best duo in Premier League history, and there was a picture of Lampard and Drogba, of Son and Kane. I'm going, where is Shearer and Sutton? Because they have to be right there at the top, because their goal scoring record between them was just unbelievable. And obviously Sutton would go on and not replicate what he'd done at Blackburn without Shearer. And it goes to just show that side and the players around them, or those two and the players around them, were just something special. And Blackburn going on, winning the Premier League title was just another one of those dream scenarios, a little bit like Leicester a few years ago. It is a smaller club. They've got Jack Walker's money behind them at that time, and it was brilliant. It was phenomenal to watch, and those two, and Shearer in particular, were just sensational.
I mean, they built that side around Shearer, really. They went out and they got, as you said, they got him a great strike partner, but the wingers were key. Obviously Wilcox and Ripley putting the ball in. Shearer always says that. I mean, back then Shearer had a bit more speed, a little bit more zip, kind of to get in behind the back four. There's so many good goals you see, especially against the big teams, Manchester United and everything else. He wasn't just a hard player who was great in the air. He had touch, he had technique, he had that zip of speed. I mean, Blackburn Rovers fans adore him. Very much like Newcastle fans do as well. He won the title there, which was massive. It was a real, up yours to Manchester United at the time, not just because they could have signed him and didn't, but because this team, little old Blackburn, came from nowhere. And it was a real kind of rags to riches story. And at the time, we were quite young at the time, but at the time it was you look back at it and watch it now, it was such a wonderful thing to see happen. Because this local guy went back to his club in Blackburn Rovers and Jack Walker, and he took them from, the nobodies to the somebodies. And it was amazing, because you could just see all the big clubs getting really pissed off with it. But going back to the main man himself, Alan, obviously, phenomenal record at Blackburn, mate. Just before we have a look at that in a bit of detail, he did suffer one of his really bad injuries at Blackburn, didn't he? I think it was they were flying high the season before they won the league, I think. And then didn't he do his cruciate? Was it his cruciate he did, I think, then? His memory serves.
Believe so. I can't remember what and was it his something like that. His anterior,
ACL might have been his ACL, possibly,
at that time. I mean, that kind of was the beginning of that little run of injuries over several years, wasn't it? And that's kind of the one drawback to him, is he had those few seasons where he did have those big injuries, and then obviously the goals dropped away because of the timeout. You've got to think, you look at his sort of the number of goals that he scored. What if he hadn't been injured? And you can say that about anybody. What if he hadn't been injured? How many more goals would he have scored? In that period of time, and it wasn't like he lacked goals around those times anyway. So just phenomenal number. So yeah, he missed that time, but obviously come back winning the title is just. I mean, that's. I think for him, if you just got the Premier League goal scoring record with nothing else to show for it, yes, it's great, but you're always going, what could have been. But because he got that Premier League title, it's always that well, at least I've got that as well to hang on to.
Absolutely, he did win the league. Like his memory serves, he came back from injury from Blackburn and screwed us out of the title as well. I believe when he set up Graham Fenton for that bloody goal. But let's have a look at this record, mate. Again, it was absolutely phenomenal, and you just want to look at that, mate, as well. You want to talk about the goals per 90 minutes. I mean, phenomenal, really, mate.
I mean, it's just ridiculous that goal scoring record is just something else. I mean, to be in the high 70s and 80s in terms of point 70 points, 0.8 is a goal scoring record in the top flight of English football is almost unbelievable. And for the type of striker that he was as well, I mean, he was strong, he was quick, he had everything to his plate. He wasn't a one-trick pony. And part of this is when I was doing these stats is I put the penalties in because I know that's sometimes something that is labelled against him is that yes, but he took all the penalties for the teams that he played with. Well, yes, but he scored 33 goals in 93-94 and only had 3 penalties. He scored 37 in 95-96 and only 3 penalties. So you can take that argument and shove it because yes, he scored 10 in 94-95, but he didn't do that consistently. He didn't get that number of penalties. So those goals were being scored from headers, from free kicks, from long range, from tap-ins, everything that Shearer could do, he would do and score a goal with it. It's just, but I mean, for 4 seasons, you look at 162 games, 123 goals. It's just, yeah, it's an unbelievable record. And it was no wonder when, again, the bigger teams and
at the time, yeah,
and a one closer to home came calling.
Absolutely. But just before we move on to obviously Shearer's homecoming, it's important to say as well, obviously, he didn't just win the league in that period of time. You know, he was the PFA Player of the Year, I think it was in 94-95, and he was 3rd in the Ballon d'Or in 95-96. I mean, this guy was at the very, very top of his game. I mean, weirdly enough, when Barcelona signed Ronaldo from PSV, Bobby Robson said he wanted Shearer. And the price quoted by Jack Walker was obviously 15 million quid. And back then, Bobby Robson was thinking, Christ, that's a bit too much money. He ended up signing this young, skinny kid from PSV that he had called Ronaldo. And that ended up quite bad, didn't it, to be fair, for Barcelona? But
he wasn't that good, was he?
He was a bit shit, but he wasn't
he was all right.
But, yeah, but again, obviously, going back to rub salt in the Manchester United wounds, this was the big one, I think, because he was off the back of Euro 96.
Golden Boot in 96 as well.
Golden Boot in 96, even though he was written off by a lot of people because he went in a bit of a drought for England, which will come on England in a minute. But
absolutely.
He obviously came home to Newcastle. Manchester United were in for him. He tells a great story, Alan. If no one's ever seen it, check it out. There's a brilliant video on the overlap with him and Gary Neville walking around the shipyards and walls, and it's absolutely brilliant. And I think Ferguson says to him when he comes and meets him, he says, "Am I seeing you first or second?" And he says, "Oh, you're seeing me second. I seen Kevin this morning." And he says, "Well, that's me." Fuck, then really, isn't it? Because Keegan's obviously done the deal and he's signed him. But it was a phenomenal piece of business. I mean, we missed out on the title the year before. It's that famous year we blew the 12-point lead. Absolutely devastated. Manchester United saw us off. You know, Cantona really kind of leading the charge. But signing Alan Shearer that summer was just unbelievable. As a Newcastle fan, obviously as a neutral mark, as a football fan, you know, we were younger then, mate. But I mean, what kind of intent did that set out by Sir John Hall and the club signing a player of that magnitude?
Well, it kind of two things, wasn't it? It was the best striker in England, best striker
arguably
in
the
Europe,
world
I think,
at
that
the
time.
You know, arguably the world.
Yeah. It was a huge amount of money, and again, I think a lot of teams looked at it and just went, "This is never going to work. That is too much." And again, you look now and you think it's 15 million. That again, we've signed a left back for more than that, and that's ridiculous. But this is 90s money. It was complete attempt, and it was the right. We've missed out. we're going for this now. We're going to get as close as we can and challenge for trophies. And this is a lad who grew up in this area, is coming home, and he's going to spearhead this team for the next 10 years. And it was just, I mean, the scenes were...
the unveiling. Wow. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable scenes, yeah. It
was like Jesus, wasn't it? It was like Jesus coming to Newcastle. It was kind of like that.
Yeah, sure. It's probably a strange way to put it, but absolutely it was. You know, you talk about Keegan being your messiah and stuff like that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. If you've got a player like that who has hit the headlines and been so prolific over the previous seasons, and again for England, that is just a ridiculous signing for that team. And it was just like you said, just such a statement of intent of where Newcastle wanted to be then.
It was. It's an interesting one because I remember when he made his debut in the Community Shield, as it was at the time, and Manchester United absolutely battered us 4-0. I was over in Menorca, and I asked a Manchester United fan where we could watch the game stupidly, and the shithouse told me to go to this pub up the road. It was full of Man United fans, and I had my name on the back of the shirt, and they were all singing "Curry, what's the score?" when it was 4-0. So that was a sad debut for Big Al. But then we got revenge on them, didn't we, that season with the 5-0, and Shearer was instrumental in that. But let's just have a look at some of his stats. I mean, interestingly enough, one of the things that they did say, they being the naysayers, was he couldn't play with Les Ferdinand. Utter bollocks that turned out to be, mate. 49 goals between them in the first season. Just phenomenal, mate. I mean, talk us through some of these stats for Shearer at Newcastle.
Yeah, I mean, again, you pick out the two key seasons there, 97-98 and 2000-2001, and again, injury hit.
Big serious
you
ones.
And just go, what could have been? But again, his goal record was still, 0.7, 0.5, 0.6 at that beginning of that time at Newcastle. Yes, it dropped a little bit towards the end, but it was still towards the 0.5s right up until that last season. So even then, his goal return was still pretty decent for a Premier League striker at that time. And when your age, you start to drop off. But 27, 25, 28, 19 goals in the sort of 4 of the last 5 seasons there were goals that Newcastle were just never going to replace at that point. And it's interesting that first, he carried on that record in his first season at Newcastle with his goals per game record or goals per 90-minute record. And it was never able to kind of get to that point again, unfortunately. And I think that was a lot of it down to those 2 injuries that he had. But he was never not prolific. Well, it doesn't matter what season he was having, what season Newcastle were having, he just scored goals.
He was just a phenomenal player. I mean, you can see the resurgence there as well when Bobby Robson took him under his wing after the Rude Hull incident, which nearly spelled the end of Shearer's career. My God, I'm so glad that argument didn't go the wrong way. Obviously, Bobby came in, Bobby got him playing, he surrounded him with legs. I think Bellamy really helped get him back in the goals as well by being his legs, and then you had Solano and Robert coming in, almost like you had with Gillespie and Ginola. Like you had Ripley Wilcox. Shearer thrived on service, and you had to give him service. It's interesting. There's an argument, going on at the minute about Ronaldo at Manchester United. Is the team not geared up for him? Shearer could have been similar if we didn't have a team geared up for him, but we did. He was the focal point of that team. That's what Alan Shearer was all about. His last season there, as we say, that record-breaking goal when he broke Jackie Milburn's record. I mean, the scenes, Mark, just makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It's just unbelievable. I mean, and the beautiful thing was Jackie Milburn was Alan's dad's hero. So for him to break that record is just wow. Honestly, I'm filling up talking about it. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
It's funny, when you get scenes like that, even as a neutral, you look at and you just have to sit there and just go, wow. That is special. There are times in football that just make you sit back and just go, this is why we love this game. And those little stories, that the fact that Jackie Milburn was his dad's footballing hero, those little nuances to the story just make it more sweet. And it's special that he was able to to come home and do that for his hometown club. You just saw what every goal meant to him. It didn't matter what competition it was, what part of the game it was. Every goal to Shearer looked like it was the best goal he ever scored because he just enjoyed it so much.
Absolutely. And, obviously Alan's still very much in the game right now. And I think a lot of the younger fans don't really understand what a player he was. There was a big argument or a big debate about, is Aguero better than him? Two different players, two different eras. But I would suggest any of these fans to go back and look at Alan Shearer in his prime. We've got a great video to play at the end of this to see us out. But, go back and just look at what this guy was all about. Some of the goals he created out of nothing, for himself, just battling, fighting for a ball. Some of the crosses he used to put in for Les Ferdinand. The 5-0 is a perfect one for me, stands out. He's got no right to get that crossing, and he was one of the best crossers of the ball at the club, but just everything about his game, like you say, he didn't just bleed black and white. He was just a proper Roy of the Rovers type player, wasn't he? And I don't think we've seen anything like him since. I mean, obviously Wayne Rooney was a phenomenal player, but I think the nearest thing we've seen him was probably Harry Kane, but Harry Kane is now starting to withdraw and go deeper and assist a bit more. Obviously, Alan's finished his career as the Premier League's all-time record goal scorer. You said a couple of times there, Mark, hadn't it been for those 2 or 3 serious injuries, he might be out of sight, 300-odd goals, 400-odd goals. But Kane looks like he's getting closer to it. Rooney was close, but again, he lost out because he, again, dropped back too deep. Do you think Kane will beat this record, mate?
I suppose it depends on where he is and what happens over the next season. I think if he continues the rest of this season the way that he's done recently, then he's on course for it. But then it depends on Spurs. Are Spurs then going to put the players around him to start getting him 20 to 25 goals a season? If not, does he go to City or somewhere like that where he's going to get the service? Because if he does that,
he might break it.
Yeah, absolutely. He could very well push towards 300, which is a frightening number of goals. And you're right. If he doesn't have those 3 sort of injury hit seasons, does Shearer, is he hitting 300 Premier League goals?
I think he is. I think he is standing on his head, mate. Absolutely. But I mean, he's an absolute legend of the game. Any fan, any player who played around that era, and you see some of the very best, the Scholeses, the Gerrards, the Lampards, the Beckhams, the Thierry Henrys, they all say the same thing. Shearer, just phenomenal, absolute machine, goal machine. They all put him in their best 11s. I think anyone who does an all-time Premier League 11 around about that era, he walks straight into the side, because he's just absolutely phenomenal. And I'm so privileged, as are you, mate, that we got to see him, at an age where we could appreciate who Alan Shearer was and what he did for the club. I think without him, for the decade that he was at the club, I think we could have ended up in real trouble. He made us better even when we were shit. There was good Newcastle teams around him that were lucky not to win something, and there was really bad Newcastle teams around him that he made look better because of just who he was and what he did. And obviously he's rightly been honoured by a statue outside the ground, but I think the new owners are going to rectify that and bring that inside the ground. Now, there's been planning permission for that. Obviously, the pub was renamed Shearer's, thank God, after Mike Ashley's gone. Just a little bit about that before we move on to Alan's England record. The utter disgrace of Mike Ashley to treat this man the way he did, mate. It was just, not only was Mike Ashley just, horrible for what he was and what he did at the club, but to not get what this guy means to Newcastle United, it's just probably the ultimate slap in the face, isn't it, mate?
Well, you go to any club like that. Can you imagine Manchester United treating Bobby Charlton,
exactly,
or Wayne Rooney, or anybody of that ilk in that regard? Can you imagine Liverpool going back and treating, the likes of Dalglish in the same way? I mean,
Gerrard, Robbie Fowler,
unbelievable that he did that. And having Shearer's back as the bar name is just the final nail in that coffin at the end of the Mike Ashley era. And moving the statue is the 2 fingers up at the end, just going, yeah, see you later. That's it, done. We are back to normal. Everything is geared in the right direction, and having those players, and especially the likes of Shearer, as even as maybe not as an ambassador of the club, but that figurehead. You've got the statue of Bobby outside, you've got the statue of Shearer outside. these are the things that clubs like that need to have. He is an utter legend. He was a legend at the 4 seasons at Rovers. He was a legend at Newcastle. And he quite deservedly has that statue outside to remember just what an awesome striker he was for you guys.
Absolutely, and the Premier League icon, without a shadow of a doubt, and definitely a worthy first inductee to the ever more Premier League icons and Newcastle United greats over the years. But just before we finish up, mate, he wasn't just Newcastle United that he did well for, Blackburn he did well for. He was England's main man as well, mate. You know, he did have little patches where he was dry, but invariably he was a fantastic goal scorer for England, mate. And you got some of his stats just to close us out in terms of how well he did for England, mate. So over to you, stat man.
So yeah, I mean, again, you think he made his debut, what, four years after he made his first division debut. At that point, you know, he scores a goal on his debut as well against France. He goes on and scores 30 goals in 63 games. As an England fan, you look and go, wow, he only played 63 games. And that in itself, when you look at just how good he was, that's the sad part, because, you know, he could have been, if he hadn't have got injured, he hadn't have had those spells away, and he had that drought prior to Euro 96, where he'd gone some time without a goal, and the relief then when he did score, and he'd go on to become the tournament's top scorer. And you had the penalty, the header again, the penalty against, was it the penalty? No, sorry. The penalty against Switzerland, the header against Scotland, the goal against Holland were just the highlights of that tournament. And you wonder what could have been, and it's kind of a theme a little bit with him. As great as he was, how many goals he scored, you still think, wow, if he played another 40 games for England, what could we have done, you know, a little bit later on, and would we have been more of a force if he'd managed to play a little bit more? But his record was still 1-2 for England. He played in tournaments in 96, 98, 2000. 2000 we were dreadful at. So, but certainly 98 and 96, we were there or there, but it could have gone on and won. But yeah, it's just another bit to his overall tally and his overall career. It's just a great goal scorer. Absolutely.
I mean, he was kind of hounded out a little bit at England, wasn't he? I think he more focused on his club career. He realised his body couldn't take England and Newcastle at the same time, which was probably why he pulled away. A bit similar to Paul Scholes, I think, whereas Paul Scholes is probably a bit more pissed off being on the left wing. But yeah, I mean, obviously England's loss was Newcastle's game. We've got another good few seasons out of Alan, and it was absolutely phenomenal. But he will go down as one of England's greatest ever goal scorers. There's no question about that whatsoever. You know, I know Rooney's obviously eclipsed his record. Kane is ahead of him now as well. Obviously, Owen was ahead of him, but they played longer than Alan probably did. I think Alan focused more on the club, you know, and it was a club that he loved, you know. So obviously, as Newcastle fans, we absolutely adore that. Everybody knows now Alan obviously retired. He's carved himself out a great career as a very good pundit. He's probably one of the best in the business, really.
He speaks, to be fair, after a shaky start, because at the beginning, a lot of people are like, oh, he's a bit dull. He's not all that, and he's grown into one of the much loved. And you look at some of the stuff that he does for, you know, the beat for Match of the Day, and he does those top tens with Lineker and Richards and stuff, and they're hilarious. And he's developed that personality now, where and he is one of the better pundits out there. I know people still, you know, don't like him, and I think there's a lot of that in terms of they don't like him because of the player.
I think it's the resentment that he wasn't at their club, mate. To be honest with you, I think a lot of people who turn a bit of shade on Shearer is probably devastated that he wasn't at their club. You know, I think there is a lot of that, mate. There was a little bit of bitterness, I think, when it comes to talking about Alan Shearer. Certainly from the likes of Manchester United fans. I mean, he still gets chanted about to this day at Old Trafford. It's unbelievable. That's a player. That's a legacy. When Manchester United fans 20 odd years later still hate you for not signing for them, that is a player and a half, mate. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But no, listen, mate, this has been great fun talking about our best ever player. You know, he's my favourite Newcastle United player, I think, of all time. Just an unbelievable goal scorer. A local hero, you know, and just, you know, not that he would listen to this. It'd be great if he does. But Alan, if you do, thank you so much for all the goals and the memories, mate. As a Newcastle United fan, Mark is a neutral just for watching you do what you do and doing it, you know, as well as you did it, mate. Absolutely superb. If you like this kind of thing, guys, please remember to click like and subscribe. We're going to be back with a few more specials. We're going to have a few more inductees into our Premier League icons forevermore. There'll be a few familiar names, I'm sure, that you guys will you'll like to see from over the years gone by. But yeah, so just before we go up, Mark, I think you've got a fantastic montage, haven't you, of just Alan's best Newcastle United goals, really, to leave on, mate.
It is, yeah. It's sort of a top six of his goals with a little bit of him just talking over a couple of them as well. And yeah, it just, I mean, one of them is against Villa. But a phenomenal goal.
I know which
so
one.
You know which one's coming.
Which one.
So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. We'll leave you with that, and yeah, as Chris says, we'll hopefully have some more of these for more Premier League icons. We're looking at, you know, Newcastle players to cover as well. So like and subscribe. If you drop your comments in as well, and we'll see you soon.
Till then, Shearer.
Shearer will fancy another blast. Right angle for him. Shearer hits it. Oh! Absolute thunderbolt from Alan Shearer.
Gone through the wall. It's such a pace, and I can just remember it rising, going into the top of the net.
Newcastle had during Kevin Keegan's reign. Here's Shearer. And still Shearer, and he took it away. Finished beautifully.
Sort of barged my way past 2 or 3 centre backs and taking it on my chest and hit it on the volley from just inside the box.
Maric free. Ferguson is waiting in the centre. It's Silvio Maric. It's Alan Shearer. That's the way to finish it. Oh, that's how he drifted last night.
Lee.
Shearer. Oh, special. Of a goal.
Villa was different. I think there's still a small part of some people that think that was a cross, but it wasn't. Rob Lee always tells me it was his pass that made it, but I've always said to Rob it wasn't a great pass, it was a good pass, and I have to do the rest.
Now Bernard. Here's Alan Shearer. Great turn.
And I've got Desai up my backside really tight to me, and I thought, well, he is too tight here, I can turn him.
Blocked by Robert, Lamiobi, and then Shearer!
I think that's my best in my career, yeah. I think I just remember a long ball forward and Shaw sort of heading it back for me, and I think we were getting beat at the time in the game against Everton, so it was just a matter of hit it and see what happened.